Hello, glad to see you on the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
When I heard the tires screech, that raw, panic sound of rubber clawing at asphalt, and then the sickening crunch of metal that followed like the closing of a steel trap, something in me clenched, not in panic, not in fear, but in tired, aching certainty. I didn't even need to look out the window to know it wasn't just any car. It was my car. My father's car. The only thing that ever truly felt like mine. A red, fully restored '69 Mustang Fastback, with leather seats that still smelled like old Marlboros and Armor All, a beast of a machine that my father spent half his retirement tinkering on, and the other half teaching me to drive in. He called it Betty. I called it the only thing he left me when he passed. I stepped outside slowly, already knowing what I'd see but needing to witness it with my own eyes, because that's what you do when you've spent your whole life pretending things weren't as bad as they are. The car sat sideways in the driveway, the front end crumpled against the retaining wall like a crushed soda can, steam hissing up from under the hood like a ghost trying to escape. Glass glittered across the concrete like it was trying to be beautiful in the middle of the wreckage. And standing next to it, keys dangling from his fingers like a toy he'd grown bored of, was Tyler. My brother. My goddamn idiot, selfish, reckless brother. He looked at me, smiled, no, smirked, and said with a shrug, "You'll forgive me. You always do." I don't know what hurt more. The wreckage of the only thing I had left of Dad, or the fact that he was right. I always did. From the time he crashed my bike into the neighbor's porch when we were 10 and I took the blame, to the time he got fired from the restaurant I got him a job at and let everyone think I was the one stealing cash from the drawer. I always forgave him. Because our mother said he was fragile, because she said he didn't mean it, because she made it my job to keep the peace while he set everything on fire. And like a fool I did. I swept up the ashes, glued the pieces back together, and pretended it didn't hurt like hell every time. But not today. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I didn't even ask if he was okay, because I knew he was. He always was. He was the type who came out clean no matter how dirty his hands got. Instead, I just looked at the wreckage, then looked at him, and then I turned around and walked back into the house. I could feel his eyes on my back, probably waiting for the part where I cry or beg him to explain, but I didn't give him the satisfaction. I went straight to my home office, the one room in the house he never bothered with, opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet, and pulled out the folder I hadn't touched in over 10 years. It was thicker than I remembered, heavy in a way that had nothing to do with paper. The tab was marked in my own handwriting, 2013. That was the year everything changed. The year I lost my marriage, my home, my sense of who I was. Back then I thought it was just bad luck. Now I know better. I sat down at the desk, opened the folder, and started reading again, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to remind myself of every detail. Every betrayal I'd forgiven. Every debt I'd erased. Every scar I let scab over without ever admitting it bled. There were old emails, printed screenshots, copies of police reports, bank withdrawals I never approved, and a letter, one I had forgotten about entirely, that proved Tyler's reach went farther than I thought. A letter written in my name, forged with my work email, that had cost me a job offer at the firm I'd wanted to join for years. I didn't know it back then, but now, with the pieces in front of me, it all made sense. Tyler had been sabotaging me for years, not just out of laziness or stupidity, but out of something colder. Something intentional. And all the while, he knew I'd forgive him. Because I always had. I heard him laugh outside, that same grating chuckle that used to charm teachers and girlfriends and judges. It sounded different now. Hollow. Thin. I reached for the folder again, and this time, I placed it squarely in the center of the desk. My hand rested on it like it was a button I'd been waiting my whole life to push. I didn't know yet exactly what I'd do with it, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to clean up his mess this time. Not for free. Not ever again. And that's when something clicked. Not in my head, in my heart. Like a switch flipped. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of wine, and called my boss, Mr. Gordon. I didn't say much. Just, "I'm going to need your help. And I want to keep this off the books." There was a pause on the other end, long enough for me to realize he probably had his suspicions for years. But all he said was, "Come in early tomorrow. Bring everything you've got." So I did. And I added one more page to the folder that night, a fresh printout of the police report I filed after Tyler wrecked Betty. Just to make it official. Because sometimes, forgiveness is just a way of delaying justice. And I was done delaying. Tomorrow, he'd learn that the thing about always being forgiven is that one day, the person forgiving you stops being your crutch and becomes your reckoning. There's a certain kind of betrayal that doesn't stab, it erodes. It doesn't come with a loud boom or a tearful confession. It arrives slowly, almost politely, in the form of a soft voice saying, "Honey, you're making this bigger than it is," and in that moment, it feels less like an insult and more like someone reaching into your chest and twisting the very idea of your reality until you start questioning if you're the problem after all. That was exactly how it felt when I sat across the table from my mother that evening, the scent of her lavender hand lotion floating between us like a shield she didn't even realize she was holding as she looked at me with those familiar, watery eyes that had always seemed to shimmer with sympathy until you realized that sympathy was never for you, not really, but for the person who had caused you pain. "Tyler's just going through a lot right now," she said, her voice dipped in that sweet, southern-tinged patience that made her sound like she was about to read scripture, not excuse a grown man's reckless destruction of his sister's most cherished possession. "You know how he gets when things are hard." I wanted to laugh, not because anything was funny, but because I had heard that exact phrase, "you know how he gets," so many times over the years that it might as well have been carved into the wood paneling of our childhood home, right alongside the pencil marks measuring our heights and the patched holes in the drywall from where he'd thrown things when he didn't get his way. I knew how he got. I knew better than anyone. He got selfish. He got manipulative. He got dangerous. And still, somehow, I was the one who needed to calm down. I didn't raise my voice, though I could feel it tightening in my throat like a pulled muscle, raw and ready to snap. I just took a breath, leaned back in the kitchen chair I had sat in during every major family argument since high school, and said quietly, "Mom, he crashed my car. He wrecked the only thing I had left from Dad. And he didn't even apologize." She waved her hand as if swatting a fly, her gold bracelets clinking together like wind chimes that didn't belong in the moment. "It's just a car, Jenna. Your father wouldn't want you to hold on to things like that." I could feel the rage rising, not the explosive kind, but the kind that spreads like oil beneath the surface of calm water, coating everything it touches with something slick and bitter and impossible to wash off. My father hated when Tyler got away with things. He was the only one who ever really stood up to him, and when he died, it was like the last barrier between me and Tyler's destruction was removed. My mother, always quick to defend her baby boy, just went full tilt into delusion. To her, Tyler was not a grown man with a long, ugly record of selfish choices. He was still the 5-year-old who cried when his balloon popped, the 10-year-old who needed help with his homework, the 17-year-old who just needed a little time to find himself. He was anything but accountable. I didn't tell her about the folder. Not yet. There was no point. She wouldn't believe it, even if I put the evidence in front of her face. She'd find some way to excuse it, say I misunderstood, say it was taken out of context, say Tyler was just confused. That's what she always did. It was easier for her to believe I was exaggerating than to admit that her golden boy had grown into a man who destroyed everything he touched. But inside, I was boiling. Not just because of the car or the years of covered-up lies, or the weight of that damn folder burning a hole in my briefcase like a loaded gun waiting to go off. No, what ate at me most was that in that moment, staring across the table at my mother's serene, unshaken face, I realized she didn't want justice. She wanted peace. Even if that peace came at the cost of her daughter's sanity, her daughter's pride, her daughter's ability to trust that her pain mattered. After dinner, I stood at the sink, washing the same 3 dishes I always ended up washing when I came over, because Tyler didn't lift a finger and Mom acted like dish soap was optional. My hands moved automatically, but my mind was elsewhere, flipping through the memories stored deep in the recesses of that manila folder I had opened for the first time in nearly a decade. Each page was a reminder of every time I had swallowed my own voice just to keep the peace. Every lie he told that I absorbed the consequences for. Every debt I paid because it was easier than watching him spiral. I was tired of easy. Easy was killing me. I left without saying goodbye. My mother was still talking about Tyler's potential, about how this might be the way-up call he needs, and I just couldn't take another word of it. On the drive home, I kept the windows down, letting the wind slap my face in a way that felt more honest than any words I'd heard that night. And when I got home, I didn't go to bed. I went in my office, opened my laptop, and started compiling everything. I didn't know what I was building yet, a case, a story, a final confrontation, but I knew it was time. I remembered something Mr. Gordon once said to me after a long day at work, when we were sitting in the conference room going over a deposition, and I looked like I was about to crack. He leaned in, lowered his voice, and said, "The trick isn't to fight fire with fire. It's to let the fire burn long enough that the right people finally notice the smoke." That stuck with me. Because for years, I had been putting out the fires Tyler started, and all it got me was more flames. So this time, I let the smoke rise. And in the morning, I walked into the office an hour early, folder in hand, heart pounding, face set. Mr. Gordon looked up from his coffee, saw me, and nodded once, like he knew this moment was always coming. Because sometimes, being the bigger person just makes you a bigger target. And I was done being that. There's a strange kind of pain that comes not from the discovery of betrayal itself, but from realizing that the evidence had always been there, quietly waiting in the dark corners of your memory, buried under layers of emotional self-preservation and family-constructed narratives you clung to just to make the dysfunction livable. I hadn't opened the storage box in the closet of my guest room in over 10 years, mostly because I had long ago convinced myself that everything inside it belonged to a past. I had made peace with old photographs, documents from my divorce, some unopened mail that had been too painful to face when it first arrived. But after seeing Tyler standing there next to the mangled remains of my father's Mustang, laughing off the destruction as if it were a minor inconvenience I should graciously absorb, something shifted in me. I stopped caring about being the good daughter, the forgiving sister, the one who held the family together with duct tape and silence. I was done pretending I didn't know what I knew. The box was heavier than I remembered. Not physically, though it did take effort to pull it down from the high shelf, but emotionally, as if it had soaked up every unanswered question, every unspoken suspicion I had pushed aside during those brutal years following my divorce. Sitting cross-legged on the floor, I peeled the lid back slowly, like I was opening a wound I had no choice but to finally examine. Inside, neatly packed but dust-covered, were envelopes, folders, and a flash drive I didn't even remember owning. It took me a few minutes to find what I didn't know I was looking for, until my fingers landed on a stack of printed emails, paper-clipped and labeled in my own handwriting with the words, "Eric, final year." Eric. My ex-husband. The man who had walked out on me 6 years into our marriage with barely more than a goodbye note and a lawyer's business card. At the time, I was too shocked to question anything. He had been distant, yes, but I chalked it up to stress, work, the usual slow drift of two people who started on the same road and somehow ended up in different towns. But now, holding those emails, I saw it for what it was, a calculated unraveling, one that hadn't started with him, but with someone else whispering poison into his ear. And that someone was Tyler. The first email was dated March of that year, and it was subtle, Tyler telling Eric he was worried about me, that I was taking on too much, that I had been acting erratic. The kind of language that, taken alone, could have come from a concerned sibling. But as I kept reading, the tone darkened. He told Eric I had been hiding financial problems, that I had made questionable choices at work, that I had snapped at our mother during dinner and might need help. There were lines I recognized as straight-up lies about me skipping work, drinking too much, even a claim that I had flirted with a client at a holiday party. Lies. But well-crafted ones, woven with just enough truth to sound plausible to someone who was already looking for a reason to leave. I remembered that year too clearly. The late nights Eric stopped coming home. The weird tension in the house, the way he started looking at me like I was a stranger. The conversations that felt like interrogations, though I didn't know then what he was reacting to. Now I knew. He had been primed, set up to believe that I was unraveling when in truth, it was Tyler who was pulling the threads loose behind the scenes. It wasn't just manipulation. It was sabotage. I read every word slowly, deliberately, absorbing the full weight of what had been taken from me, not just a marriage, but my sense of self, my ability to trust my own version of events. Tyler had rewritten the story of my life and handed that edited script to the one person who was supposed to be on my side. And it worked. Eric left, believing he had escaped a ticking bomb, never realizing he'd been handed the timer by my own brother. When I finished reading, I sat in silence for what felt like hours, the letters spread out around me like puzzle pieces that had finally started to form a clear, terrible picture. I didn't cry. I had cried enough for Eric over the years. What I felt now wasn't grief. It was clarity. Cold, sharp, and final. I printed fresh copies of the emails, careful to highlight the ones with specific, verifiable lies, details Tyler couldn't pretend were misunderstandings. I added them to the folder I had begun building, which was no longer just about a car or a bad week or even a decade of bad behavior. It was about a pattern. A campaign. A quiet, calculated destruction of everything I had built simply because Tyler couldn't stand not being the center of my universe. I also opened the flash drive, curious and half expecting it to be corrupted or empty. What I found stunned me. Hidden among work documents and photos was a folder titled FYI, containing audio recordings. Some were voicemails I had saved years ago and forgotten about. Others were different. At least 2 were recordings of Tyler talking to our mother about me, mocking me, twisting things I had confided in her, laughing about how Jenna will always take the blame. She's wired for guilt. My own mother had chuckled in the background. Not loudly, not cruelly, but enough. I copied the audio to my laptop, labeled the files, and slid a small USB stick into the back pocket of the folder. Later that night, I sat in bed, folder beside me, and stared at the ceiling for a long time, wondering how many other moments in my life had been tainted by this silent campaign of sabotage. How many choices I made, relationships I lost, jobs I didn't get, were connected not to fate or failure, but to the quiet war my brother had been waging behind my back. And it occurred to me, in that cold, sleepless silence, that I wasn't planning revenge anymore. Revenge was emotional, impulsive, messy. This was something else. Something colder. More surgical. I wasn't going to destroy him. I was going to dismantle him, piece by piece, using his own words, his own lies, his own actions. No screaming. No scenes. Just the quiet, undeniable truth. The folder wasn't just evidence. It was the blueprint. And Tyler had no idea what was coming. By the time I decided to invite Tyler to dinner, the plan had already taken shape so cleanly and precisely in my mind that I didn't feel nerves or second thoughts, only a quiet, simmering anticipation that vibrated beneath the surface of my every movement like a low, distant hum. It wasn't rage anymore, not even the satisfying sense of moral superiority I thought might accompany a moment like this, just cold, deliberate preparation, the same way you'd set a table before a storm. I chose Saturday because that was the day Mom always cooked something warm and filling and expected us both to come by out of tradition, not affection. And I knew Tyler wouldn't suspect anything unusual if the setting looked like any other family dinner where everyone smiled a little too tightly and talked around the truth like it was fine china we were afraid to chip. I spent that entire morning polishing the dining room, lighting candles, and placing clean plates at the spots I already knew we'd sit. Mom at the head of the table where she could keep an eye on everything but never truly take responsibility for any of it. Tyler to her right where she could pat his hand and refill his glass like he was a boy who needed comfort instead of a man who needed consequences, and me across from him, exactly where I always ended up, looking straight into the eyes of the person who broke things just to watch me fix them. But this time, I didn't plan to fix a damn thing. I cooked his favorite meal, beef pot roast with roasted carrots and garlic mashed potatoes, because I wanted him comfortable, wanted the scent to lull him into that same arrogant familiarity that made him dangerous. That belief that no matter how badly he behaved, the world would reset for him by the end of the night. He walked in with a six-pack of overpriced craft beer and a stupid grin plastered across his face like the crash never happened, like the mess he made of my life never happened. Like the only thing that mattered was that the food smelled good and Mom was already halfway into a glass of Pinot Grigio. He slapped me on the back like we were teammates and said, "Smells like you're finally getting over the whole car thing." I smiled. Not because anything was funny, but because it's always more satisfying to flip a switch when the lights are already on. I took the beer, set it on the counter, and said, "Hope you brought your appetite." Dinner went exactly how I expected. Mom floated around the table with her usual feigned cluelessness, asking about Tyler's new job, which he claimed to have started last week, though I knew from the background check I ran that he hadn't held steady employment in over 8 months. And chirping over how good it was to have the whole family back together again, as if we were some Norman Rockwell painting instead of a pile of broken glass glued together with guilt and denial. Tyler bragged about a business opportunity that he said might take him to Austin next month, which Mom ate up with a spoon, her eyes sparkling like he was 17 again and telling her he was thinking about college, when really he just wanted to buy time before his next disaster. I let him talk. I let her coo. I nodded, smiled, passed the bread. And when the plates were cleared and Mom brought out the apple pie she always kept in the freezer for special nights, I stood, walked quietly to my bag in the other room, and returned with the folder. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't slam it on the table or throw it in his face. I just set it down in front of him, carefully, like a server presenting a final course, and I said with a calmness that didn't feel like me, "You said I'd forgive you. You've been right about that for a long time. But you were right for the wrong reasons." His smirk flickered, just a flash, just a fraction of a second where he realized the game had changed, and then he reached for the folder like he didn't believe there could be anything inside it that could hurt him. But the first page wiped the confidence clean off his face. It was a copy of one of the emails he sent to Eric, dated just weeks before our marriage collapsed, where he wrote that I wasn't stable enough for long-term partnership, that I had started acting volatile, that I had the kind of trauma men never recover from. He looked at it like it was written in a language he no longer spoke, like maybe someone else had typed it from his account, and he was just the innocent target of a misunderstanding. He flipped to the second page and found the bank withdrawal slip, my name forged in loopy, inconsistent script, used to drain $1,200 from my savings to bail him out of a failed poker game in Reno. He looked up at me, mouth halfway open, eyes wide, like a kid caught cheating on a test, and said, "Where did you get this?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I just sat down, folded my hands in my lap, and looked straight into his face like I was looking into a mirror I had finally cleaned. Then I spoke, not loudly, not cruelly, just truthfully. "For years, you've counted on me keeping quiet. You've counted on Mom protecting you. You've counted on the fact that no matter what you did, I'd be the one to smooth it over, to bury it, to pretend like we were still a family worth saving. And I did that, Tyler. God help me, I did that longer than anyone should have. But this," I said, tapping the folder with my index finger, "this is the part where I stop." He didn't say anything. Not really. He mumbled something about context, about how I was taking it too far, about how everyone makes mistakes. But the rhythm of his voice had changed. The arrogance was gone. The certainty was gone. All that remained was a little boy, backed into a corner, realizing for the first time that the adult in the room had finally stopped playing by his rules. Mom sat frozen, pie fork halfway to her mouth, staring at the papers like they were written in fire. She said my name once softly, like she wanted to stop me but didn't know how. I didn't even look at her. This wasn't her moment. This was mine. When it was over, I stood, gathered my things, and left the folder on the table. I didn't need to say anything else. Because everything that needed to be said was already printed, dated, and color-coded. And Tyler knew it. There are moments in life when you feel something shift in the air around you, not like a gust of wind or a storm rolling in, but something subtler, quieter, yet heavier. As if the universe itself just adjusted its weight slightly on your shoulders and dared you to either stand taller or collapse under it, and that's exactly what it felt like in the minutes after I left that folder on the dinner table. The thick manila shell holding a decade's worth of carefully collected truth, a timeline of damage that Tyler had spent years pretending didn't exist, now laid bare between the half-eaten pie and the last swigs of warm beer no one was touching anymore. I didn't look back as I left the house, didn't glance over my shoulder for one last reaction, one final attempt to see guilt or fear or even a flicker of apology in his face, because I knew what I'd already seen, his mouth slack, his eyes darting from document to document like someone watching the walls of his reality start to crumble in slow motion, and I had no desire to witness whatever desperate performance he'd inevitably scramble to deliver once he recovered his footing. I wasn't interested in his excuses, his deflections, or his sudden desire to reconcile after years of barely treating me like a human being unless he needed something. I had given him the floor for too many years. This was my moment to walk off the stage. The next morning, I sat in Mr. Gordon's office, the early sun cutting sharp angles across the floor as I laid out the folder in front of him, page by page, methodically, without embellishment or apology. He listened, eyes narrowed but steady, occasionally jotting down notes or asking for clarification, not because he doubted me, but because he wanted everything airtight. He wasn't the kind of man to deal in speculation or sentiment. He dealt in facts, and now, finally, so did I. I showed him the forged emails, the bank withdrawals, the audio clips from the flash drive, the screenshots of messages Tyler had sent from my email account years ago, posing as me, tanking a client relationship that cost our firm thousands, something I had been reprimanded for at the time, forced to take a demotion over, because back then I had no proof and no one believed me when I said it wasn't my doing. But now I had everything. When I finished, he sat back in his chair, tapping his pen against his chin in thought before asking the question I had known would come. What do you want to do with all this, Jenna? It was the simplest question in the world, yet it landed with the force of a freight train, because the truth was I hadn't fully decided. I hadn't gathered all this just to destroy him, though God knows he deserved it. I didn't need him arrested or publicly humiliated or excommunicated from the family, at least not in the way he might have expected. What I wanted was more profound, more calculated, and infinitely more permanent. I want him to feel the consequences, I said slowly, deliberately, every syllable landing like a nail being driven into wood. Not in court. Not in front of strangers. I want him to feel it where it hurts most, in the places where he's always counted on being safe. I want him to know that I'm no longer covering for him, no longer shielding him, no longer playing dumb. I want to pull the curtain back and let everyone see who he really is. Mr. Gordon nodded, as if that made more sense to him than any legal route ever could. He advised me on how to protect myself, what to file, what to document, how to make sure that if Tyler tried to retaliate or drag me into one of his schemes again, he'd hit a wall made of facts and signatures and timelines he couldn't manipulate. I followed every step to the letter, and by the end of the week, I had quietly severed every financial and professional tie Tyler had ever exploited. The calls started coming that weekend, first from Mom, her voice tight with confusion and disbelief as she asked why Tyler's account had been flagged by the credit union for suspected fraud, why she'd been contacted by a former colleague of mine about the client incident from years ago, why everything seemed to be unraveling all at once. She asked if I had something to do with it, her tone more wounded than angry, as if I had betrayed her by finally taking off the blindfold she'd been wearing willingly for years. I didn't lie. I told her I had given people the truth and let them decide what to do with it. I told her that I was done managing everyone's perception just to keep a fragile piece that had never benefited me. And I told her, as gently as I could, that she needed to stop asking me to protect the person who had done the most damage to both of us. I didn't hear from Tyler until the following Tuesday. It was a voicemail, one I listened to in my car in the parking lot of the grocery store, hand frozen on the steering wheel as his voice came through the speaker with a mixture of arrogance and desperation that made my skin crawl. "I don't know what you think you're doing," he said, "but you've gone too far. You need to call me back. This isn't over." And then, almost as an afterthought, he added, I didn't mean to hurt you, you know. You always make it so damn easy. I sat there for a long time, staring out at nothing, the phone still in my hand, that last line echoing in my mind like a cruel nursery rhyme. You always make it so damn easy. Maybe I had. Maybe for years, I had worn my forgiveness like a badge, mistaking tolerance for strength, hoping that if I was patient enough, kind enough, loyal enough, he'd eventually grow into the brother I pretended he already was. But now I saw it clearly, he hadn't hurt me because I was weak. He had hurt me because he knew I was strong enough to survive it, and that meant he could use me as his safety net without ever looking down. I didn't return his call. I didn't respond to the emails that followed. I didn't react when he started throwing around vague threats to mutual friends, suggesting I was unstable, angry, out for blood. Let him talk. Let him flail. The truth was out, and the damage he had caused was no longer mine to clean up. The folder sat on my desk for weeks afterward, unopened, but always within reach, a quiet monument to the years I lost and the strength I reclaimed. And though I thought about burning it, shredding it, doing something dramatic to mark the end of that chapter, I never did. Because part of me knew that Tyler wasn't done yet, not really. People like him don't vanish quietly. They retreat, regroup, and wait for another moment of weakness. But I had none left to give. And in the end, it wasn't the folder that destroyed him, it was the realization that the one person he had always counted on to forgive him had finally stopped playing along. And that kind of silence? That kind of stillness? That's what real consequences sound like.